bless every family that's here represented. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, sir.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is going to be a work session to discuss a few things. Mayor Stewart is going to give us an update on parks, and then we've got a gentleman, Reed, who is from Steeple, and he will talk to us a little bit about bonds and things of that nature, maybe with the opportunity that we have coming up. I'm not sure what your agenda is, but in general education, I imagine, correct? And then we have Ms. Lindsay from the Regional Planning Commission that will be speaking with us as well in regards to the comprehensive plan. Irondale. All right, that being said, Mayor Stewart, I just want to go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Council President. I would like to just say good evening to everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight to be able to hear a couple of presentations that I feel that are very important to the city, especially as we begin to look forward in FY 2021. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the parks. I inadvertently typed parks into the notice that went out, but I can't give you an update on the Ruffner Park. I should be meeting with Mr. Kelly after the holidays, and he's gone back to refine the comprehensive plan that he had put together for Ruffner Park. So he's coming in after the holidays to be able to sit down and to be able to share with me some of the adjustments that he's made to the plan that was presented probably a couple of months ago. Also, we're going to have Mr. Reed Kavanaugh, who is with Stiefel. Reed is a good friend of mine. We actually met in 2011 when I was on the council, and when we did our first bond issue when I was on the council, he was the one that took us to New York to be able to make the presentation. So Reed and I go back to 2011, and I was just joking with him when I introduced him to our kids. The last time that Reed and I went to New York, we only packed enough clothes for one day, and our flight was delayed. So Reed decided that he was going to just go buy some new clothes and stay in New York. James wanted to get home, so I stayed in the airport until 2 o'clock in the morning to get a ride home. And on that flight, it was Jimmy Stevens, myself, because they were up there doing some stuff for Jefferson County. So we always laugh about how Reed left me in New York, and he went and bought some new clothes, and he stayed up there and had another fabulous day up there. But Reed's going to give us a presentation just covering giving the introduction into municipal bonds, and he's going to share with you tonight what happens in a bond transaction or when a municipality decides that they want to refund a bond issue. Once Reed has completed his presentation, it should take him 20 minutes with the presentation, and then he's going to have a Q&A period to be able to receive questions from the council. Once Reed has completed his presentation, then we're going to have Ms. Lindsay Puckett to come from the Regional Planning Commission. Lindsay helped us to be able to put our first comprehensive plan together in 2016, but also we realized that every 5 years you're supposed to update that plan or to be able to revise it. And we know that the environment in Irondale has definitely changed since we approved it in 2016. So Ms. Lindsay Puckett is going to come tonight, and she's going to just give us the ins and outs of a comprehensive plan, kind of share some of the things that we could actually do here in Irondale. Because I truly believe that if we're going to move forward in 2021, we must have a blueprint to be able to do that. And if you do not have a plan to succeed, you've already developed a plan to fail. So we want to make sure that we have a blueprint that is comprehensive of the entire city so that we can have citizens to be able to engage in the process, and that we can be able to do the things that our citizens have identified as a priority. So at this time, Council President, if it's okay with you, I would invite Mr. Reed Kavanaugh to come and to give a presentation to the council on introduction to municipal bonds, warrants, and financing considerations.
Absolutely, by all means.
Can I take this off? Are we okay with that? Or should I leave it on?
I think we're okay as long as you're behind the barrier there.
Well, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. I did beg James to stay an extra night. That weather was terrible. And what time did you get home, James?
4 o'clock in the morning?
4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I guess I'm just not as big of a man as he is to be able to do that. I was tired after a long day. But I will say this: he led the presentation up there and he knocked it out of the park. That was at a very difficult time in the city's history when the Trinity Hospital whole issue was unfolding, and there had been a good bit of debt that had been issued, anticipating that coming, and the rug got pulled out from the city. And James had to field a lot of tough questions up there on that, and he did a fantastic job representing the city. So I do remember that, and it was one of our better trips. And the city came out with an A+ credit rating and has been upgraded a couple of times since. So the proof was in the pudding. He did a fantastic job. So who am I talking to? Who's flipping these slides for me?
I can do that.
Okay.
Just the arrow key?
Yep, I think that ought to work. There we go. All right, so I'm with Stiefel, and our company's name used to be Merchant Capital. We were founded in Montgomery. We did a lot of municipal finance work in the Southeast. That's all we did. We got up every day and dealt with cities and counties and school boards and water boards that issue municipal bonds. And we had developed a practice in the Southeast, and Stiefel's a publicly traded company. They're a financial services company, and they were not very active in the Southeast. They were big in California, New York, and other places, but not in the Southeast. So they bought Merchant Capital in 2015, and we became part of them. And if you look at that table at the bottom, all the way on the left, Stiefel's ranked #1 in the nation by the number of municipal bond transactions that we've underwritten. So you think about Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Citigroup and all of these big Wall Street banks, and yet you've got Stiefel headquartered out of St. Louis that has underwritten more transactions than any firm in the country. So we're happy to be associated with them. Next one, next slide. So we do have our headquarters for the Southeast is in Montgomery, have a big office in Birmingham. Stiefel also bought Stern Agee a few years ago. So y'all all recognize that building there off 280, and that we have a big presence there. We have about 83 employees in the Birmingham area. That's our Alabama presence. You can go to the next one. So that's the end of the commercial. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about, for those of you that haven't been through bond financing before, I know Bobby Joe and the mayor, this is going to be a little bit old hat for them. They know most of this, but if you haven't been through an issue before, I just want to touch on some of the basics. What is a municipal bond? It's just an IOU, is all it is, just a debt instrument. And in Alabama, we have a really quirky thing. In our Constitution, it says anytime a city or a county wants to issue bonds, it has to be voted on by the people. Well, the lawyers figured out quick that, how are we ever going to do that? Every time that a city or a county wants to go buy a police car or whatever, we can't have a vote of the people. So they decided to, hey, let's don't call them bonds, let's call them warrants. It's the exact same thing, no difference. It's just a different name. But when a city or a county issues warrants, you don't have to have a vote of the people. Okay, so very few municipalities in Alabama actually issue bonds. They're generally always called warrants. It's the exact same thing, and we'll talk about a bond issue, or we're going to sell your bonds on this day. So when you hear the word bond, just think warrant. That's what cities and counties in Alabama issue, and it's the same thing. Next slide. So the way you think about us, we're long-term financing. Banks are really good in the shorter-term space. They are funded primarily through deposits. Demand deposits, which people can pull their money out of the bank quickly. So they don't generally like to lock an interest rate for a long period of time. That's changed a little bit in the last several years. Sometimes you'll see them go 15, sometimes 20 years. But banks usually like to lock your interest rate for 5 years or so and then have it reset. In our world, we're long-term financing people. We go out 30 years, can do 20, 10, shorter, but we can go out 30 years. And we're doing buildings, we're doing civic centers, jails, things that have a long, useful life. So that's why municipalities issue bonds. And most of that stuff you see up there, and most of the bonds issued in the state and in the country by municipalities are tax exempt. And so when we talk about a tax exempt bond, what we mean is that the interest that the investor receives, when they buy that bond and they get an interest payment, they don't have to pay taxes on that interest. And because of that, they're willing to accept a lower interest rate. So if they go buy a 30-year treasury bond and it's at, I'm making these numbers up, they're nowhere near this, but if it's at 10% and they're in the 30% tax bracket, well, they got to give 3 of those percentage points to the government. So they end up netting 7 on a taxable bond, a U.S. Treasury bond. On a tax exempt bond, you'd see the same bond and it'd probably be at 7% because the investor gets to keep all said, they don't have to pay any taxes on it. And so tax exempt financing usually has a lower rate because the investor doesn't have to pay taxes. So that's what we mean. Cities and counties do issue taxable bonds. Y'all have issued some taxable bonds and there's good reasons for that. We can talk a little bit about that in a minute. But you'll see cities, counties do refinance their debt. You'll see them incentivize projects. Irondale has incentivized projects before. So there's lots of different reasons why cities and counties go out and borrow money on a long-term fixed rate basis. Next slide. I'm only going to talk about 2 of these. The main one to think about for cities and counties is general obligation warrants or general obligation bonds. A general obligation speaks to, when the investor buys it, what kind of guarantee do they have from the city? And a general obligation means you're pledging your full faith and credit. Every piece of revenue you have that comes in this door, you promise the investor you'll use everything you possibly can to pay these bonds back. It's viewed as the most secure investment. You get the lowest interest rate when you issue general obligation bonds. You can issue limited obligation bonds where you're only pledging 1 sales tax, and if that sales tax is not enough to pay the bonds, tough luck, the investor doesn't get paid back, okay? But that has a higher rating on it, and it's going to have higher interest rate, a lower rating and higher interest rate. Revenue bonds, the city has issued some revenue bonds in the past. For instance, you could issue water revenue bonds where you only pledge the revenues off your water system. You're not pledging the city's full faith and credit. So that is another type of bond that you see. But generally, if you hear somebody talking about a GO warrant, GO general obligation, that's what they mean, is it's a full faith and credit of the city of Irondale. And that's what most cities and counties in Alabama issue, is general obligation warrants. All right? And I'm trying to go through this fairly quickly because I know we've got other speakers here tonight. And but if you've got any questions in the middle of this and want to stop me, feel free to. Another thing in the Constitution is a debt limit. So the Constitution of the state of Alabama tells cities and counties you can only borrow so much money. And for cities, it's a calculation. It's 20% of the net assessed value of all the property in the city limits of Irondale. So you add up everybody's home and everybody's car, you take all the real and personal property in the city, and you get the net assessed value of that, and then you take 20% of that number, and that's how much money you can go into debt for. Okay, so your total net assessed value was $234 million. 20% of that was, right at $47 million. You've got some debt that's already charged to your debt limit, about $18 million. So you've got about $28.6 million. So legally, you could go out and borrow $28.6 million and you'd still be under your constitutional debt limit. Now, there was another amendment of the Constitution that says, you got a new auto mall that's going to come to town, and you're going to incentivize that, and you're going to go borrow money to make a bunch of site improvements so they'll come here. If you borrow money for economic development purposes, you've got a whole nother debt limit you can use, and it's called 772. That's the constitutional amendment, and it's 50% of your assessed value. So you look at the 234, you could go out and borrow $115 plus $117 million to incentivize, debt. So I mean, it's kind of crazy to think of going out and borrowing that kind of money, but legally you could do that. All right, let's go to the next one. So who's involved in a bond financing or a warrant financing? You've got the underwriter. That's what we do. Okay, so our job is to really quarterback the transaction. We help you structure it, help you figure out, can you really afford to borrow this much money? Can you use tax-exempt bonds for this, or do you have to use taxable bonds? How long can you amortize it? What are the interest rates likely to be? That kind of thing. And then once the whole deal's structured, we take it to the rating agency, and there's a presentation that's made. They put a credit rating on your bonds. We're going to talk more about credit ratings in a minute. And then once you have the credit rating on the bonds, then you're ready to go out and sell. Then the underwriter takes it and we sell it to the investors. And we'll talk about who those are in a minute. The interest rate's locked in, and then the money's wired and closed. So that's our role. You've got a bond attorney or a bond counsel too. That's a specific type of attorney. It's a very small niche. There's only a few firms in the state of Alabama that do that work. But they basically review all the documents, they produce all the documents, and then they give a legal opinion that the investors who are buying the bonds, they rely on, that says you can deduct this interest off your taxes. So when you file your tax return and you're an investor and you collected this interest payment from the city of Irondale, you don't have to pay taxes on that. And they give a legal opinion, so investors rely on that opinion when they buy the bonds. So it's a very specialized type of legal practice, and that's their role. They're very involved in the deal. The trustee handles the money, so when you make payments, you're making the payment to the trustee. They take the money and ship it out to all the bondholders nationwide. Rating agency, they put a rating on the bonds, so investors kind of know generally, what's your credit like and how do you stack up to other cities and counties. So those are the main ones. We'll skip some of those other ones for now. And then we're going to blow through these because I really kind of cut through this. So you can go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Here we go. All right, so now we're on credit ratings. Like I said, Irondale has a AA credit rating. There's 3 major rating agencies that rate municipal bonds: Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. And those are their scales. They all, Fitch and Standard & Poor's use the same scale, but Moody's has a little different scale. Y'all are rated by Standard & Poor's and you have a AA. I will tell you that is an outstanding credit rating for a city in Alabama. It's very difficult to get in the AA category at all. AA minus is a good rating. Y'all are a notch above that at AA. Very few get to AAA. It's really, really difficult. You got Huntsville that's got Redstone Arsenal and NASA and things like that. You got to have something really big in your town, a university or a huge military presence, or just something, Hoover's been AAA, having the Galleria there and that big sales tax producer, that sort of thing. But most cities and counties in Alabama are going to be in the single A category. There are some that are in the AA. So your AA credit rating is good. And I'll tell you, one of the main things that drives that rating is your cash reserves. In your last rating report, they cited that your cash reserves were 30% of your expenditures, which is outstanding. You actually bumped it up a good bit last year. Fiscal 19, I think you got closer to 70% of yours. So the city's got a lot of liquidity. Rating agencies love that. Things happen, tornadoes happen, unplanned, disasters can happen, pandemics can happen, all sorts of things can happen that can affect city's revenues. And when you've got cash in the bank, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. And y'all have done a really good job here over a long period of time building these reserves up. You originally set a goal at 15%. In fiscal year 18, you were double that at 30%. Now you're closer to 70% based on your fiscal 19 audit. So hats off, you've done a fantastic job, and you're viewed very favorably by the rating agency. On this slide, and I'm going to leave you all a copy of this, so I'm not going to cover every point of this, but the one thing I'll talk about here, the key document when you're doing a bond financing is what we call the official statement. And that is the document that describes everything about the city. And it talks about your top taxpayers, and it talks about, you know, your demographics and your income levels in the area, and what kind of school system you have, and, you know, police and fire and all. It tells an investor everything they want to know about the city. And that document's really key, because we take that document and we put our name on the front cover of it, and then we go and hand it to investors, and they make an investment decision based on reading that document. So it has to be very accurate, and it has to be, you know, no mistakes, no errors. That it's a really critical thing. The Securities Exchange Commission pays a lot of attention to official statements and making sure that they're accurate and complete, and they don't leave any information out. So that's a document that we spend a lot of time with the attorneys and with staff. James has helped out a lot preparing these in the past, making sure they're all right and everything. Let me see if there's anything else on there. We'll skip for now. We'll go on to the next one. So who are we selling these bonds to? We're selling them to insurance companies, mutual funds, banks buy a lot of bonds, individuals buy a lot of bonds. So Stifel, you know, can take those and sell them to people that have brokerage accounts there at Stifel or other firms. So there's lots of different buyers of municipal bonds out there. It's not just investors, but a lot of insurance companies in particular buy municipal bonds. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, now we're getting into, that's kind of a really quick overview of Bonds 101. Now we're going to drill down real specific to City of Irondale. And this is kind of the spread of your bonded indebtedness, okay? So you've got all the way over on the left it says period ending. So those are fiscal years. And so starting that row over, when you go series 2019, you've got $1,391,466. That means on that series 2019 bond issue, you just did that last year, the payment that comes due during the fiscal year that ends 2021, the sum of all the payments on that bond issue is $1,391,466. Okay, and you keep going over, series 2015D, the sum of all the payments that come due on that in fiscal year 2021 is $806,000. And so on and so forth. So when you add it up all the way over, you can see the total column. It says aggregate debt service. It's your total payments, you know, your 5.6 million dropping down to 4.3 for a couple of years. Then you go down 3 millions and so on and so forth. So your debt picture is falling off. Your payments are going down over time. And I've got all of this that I'm going to leave with you, but it tells you below what each bond issue was issued for. Why did you issue each one of these? You know, what's the average interest rate on each issue? These payments up here, these are principal and interest payments, both combined. So down below it tells you what's my outstanding balance, what's the principal balance that we owe on it. And that's what that line is. The call provision is another thing that's really important. So in municipal bonds, again, we specialize in long-term financing. So when an investor buys a bond that might mature in 30 years, and let's just say he buys it at 3%, and let's say a month later, you know, rates drop to 2.75. He doesn't want somebody coming and taking his bond away from him at 3% and giving him one at 2.75. These are, a lot of insurance companies buy these bonds, and they have all these actuarial things of when people are going to die and when they're going to need their money. They're buying it to hold that investment for a long time. And so you have what's called a call provision, and usually it's 10 years. So when you're selling a 30-year bond, you can't pay it off for the first 10 years. Okay, you can't pay it off until it becomes callable. So you can call that bond back from the investor. And that's one of the ways you're able to get such a low long-term rate and a fixed rate that doesn't change, but you got to give the investors what they call call protection. You got to give them a little, let them hold that bond for a while. And so each one of these bonds that you have outstanding has a date at which you can call it back out of the market. Okay, and that's what those dates are down there along. None of your bonds have any prepayment penalties, so when you hit that call date, you can just pay them off at face value. And then we got the tax status. Most of them that you've issued, well, about half and half are taxable, tax exempt. And there's reasons for that. We can go into that another day. I've highlighted two columns, the 2015D and the 2014C. Those are two that you may have an opportunity to refund and save some money. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. So I talked to James about this a while back. We've talked for a while, and I guess this was back in September of 2020, we had a table like this put together, and that's where your rates were at that time. So what you see here on the second column is those are your existing payments on the bonds that we're refunding or suggesting you look at refunding from the 2014C and the 2015D bonds that you've got out there. Those are your payments. That's if you don't do anything and you add all those payments up, y'all are scheduled to pay $14,175,490 in principal and interest on those two warrants over the life. With a new financing back in September, that number would have dropped down to $13.4 million. So you would have saved right around $700,000. And you take your savings a little bit every year. And you can take it either all up front and keep your payments the same, or you can lower the payments like what this is showing and take it over time. And then we always, in our business, we talk about the present value. That's an important number. So, you save $682,000 in real dollars over life, but a lot of that savings comes in the out years. And dollars are not as valuable 10 years from now as they are today, obviously, because of inflation. So we always run a present value calculation on that, like what is this really worth to me today? So today, the present value of that 682 is about a 578. So you have a little under $600,000 in savings on that, had you been able to do that and sell it back in September. And rates in our market, they hit an all-time historical low August 7th. So rates have never been lower in the history of whenever. You can go back as far as you want to go, but August 7th of this year, rock bottom. And they've come off that a little bit. So they had come up a little bit in September, and they've come up just a little bit more. So go to the next slide. So I use current rates now, and look what happened. So the savings has gone from, the gross went from like 680 down to 332, and it went from 570 something to 246. Okay, so the interest rates have come up just a little bit, and it hits that savings. If you look at refunding these, you're not talking about extending the time. You're going to keep the payoff date the exact same. You're just lowering your interest rate and taking the savings. What this tells us is you've got an opportunity. In order to refund those bonds, you have to hire an underwriter, someone like us or one of our competitors out there. You got to get a bond attorney on board. He's got to draft all the bond documents. Then you got to go to the rating agency, get your credit rating in place. Once that's in place, then you're ready to sell. Well, all of that takes 30 to 60 days. And so rates are going to continue to go up and down over that 30 to 60 days. So if we had the paperwork finished today, we might tell you, man, let's sit on this a little bit. Let's not sell it today. Let's wait and see if we can get a little bit closer to where that number was in September. But what's interesting is the cities and the counties that get all their paperwork together and get ready, they're the ones that can move quickly when the rates change, instead of having to see the rate change and then get started. Well, by the time you finish, the rate may be gone. So getting prepared and getting all your paperwork together can make a lot of sense. Let's see what's on the next slide. This is just giving you a ballpark, and again, I'm going to leave all this with you. Hey, if we wanted to borrow $10 million and we wanted to amortize it over 10 years, what would our interest rate be? 0.9%. Isn't that incredible? You can lock your interest rate fixed for 10 years in the municipal bond market, tax exempt, for less than 1%. And if you go out 30 years, you're at 2.25%. A fixed rate for 30 years at 2 1/4. It's just astounding. So even though rates have come up a little bit, they're still at very historically low levels. So it is a good time to be in the market for capital improvements and that sort of thing. So here's the chart, and you can kind of see what I was talking about. This is like this goes back to January 1, 2016. And this just kind of shows you the interest rates. This is the 30-year interest rate. It's a long interest rate, but you can see we had Brexit here. And after Brexit, rates shot up. And then we had the presidential election in 2016. They shot up some more. Then we had the tax bill in 2017. That pushed rates up. Then we started this decline all the way down. And we got to March of this year. And COVID hit, and the bond market really shut down for a couple of months. That rate, it spiked, but it really wasn't a true rate because you really couldn't sell anything. Nobody was buying it. And then it just came all the way back down. Like I said, on August 7th, we hit a low. And you can see we've come up a little bit and actually come back down in the last few weeks. But you can look from a historical perspective, we're still at very, very low interest rates. So, I'm over my time. I got to speed up. We're done just about anyway. Yeah, so I've already talked about the process of putting a deal together and how long that takes. It's 45 to 60 days, and I think that's it. So I just wanted to leave you with one. We're grateful to be here. We've had an opportunity to work with the city in the past, work with James, Bobby, Joe. I think our first deal was in 2007. Actually, we did here, but we've done several since. And we appreciate that opportunity. And just if you hadn't been through a bond issue before, we feel like we've been told by other cities that this kind of presentation is helpful to kind of get you oriented as to what you're looking at. You do have a good opportunity to do a couple of refundings, so you might want to think about that. But other than that, I'll just stop here and open it up for any questions.
Floor is open.
I have several questions. You mentioned 2 bonds.
Yes, ma'am.
Were these 2 bonds, I made some notes, were they in 2014 and 2015?
Yes, ma'am. We can
That's
flip
when
back.
they were issued?
Back, right? Yeah. The 2 that are highlighted, the 15D and the 14C.
And, okay. And how much was the principal debt on each bond?
Okay, so on the 15D, it's $4,415,000. And on the 14C, it's $7,900,000. I'm going to leave you with all this information. All right, go ahead.
And what is the length of these bonds?
So you can see the 15Ds pay off in the year 2035, and the 14Cs pay off same year, 2035.
What is the interest rate on these bonds?
And the interest rate is on the 15D, the average rate of all of the maturities outstanding is a 3.97, and the average rate on the 14C is a 3.57.
Yes, thank you. Is the interest paid quarterly?
It's paid semi-annual, twice a year.
Semi-annually. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Councilman, did you want?
And are these bonds callable? That's what you,
Okay, so these bonds can be what we call advance refunded.
okay.
And what that means is, if you look down on the call provision on both of them, the 15Ds are not callable until January 1, 2025. And the 14Cs are callable October 1, 2023. And when you do what's called an advance refunding, you issue a new set of bonds and you take the money and you put it into an escrow account. And that escrow account's invested in U.S. Treasuries. They're called slugs, state and local government securities. It's a special type of U.S. Treasury that only cities and counties can buy. Members of the general public can't buy them. But you invest them in those U.S. Treasuries, and then that escrow sits there and makes the payment on the old bonds until you get to that call date. And and then there's enough money in the escrow to pay them off. And so part of the issue has been, January, February this year, if you had that escrow sitting there and it had 5 years on it, that escrow was earning, maybe 1.5%, 1.5%. Now it's earning about 10 basis points, 15 basis points. So that's one of the things that you got to watch, and when you're analyzing these deals, is how much can I earn on that escrow? Because the more you earn on the escrow, the less you got to put in it, the less money you borrow to refinance it. So those are all things you got to look at when you're doing what's called an advance refund. But all of those things are taken into account when we run those savings reports that we've showed up here a minute ago.
Right. Is the ability of the city to issue new bonds limited by covenants? That is, agreements written into existing bond contracts? And if so, what is that bond limit?
No, your limitation on the debt, the principal amount of debt you can borrow is in the Constitution. That's the 20% of your net assessed value. So revenue bonds, we touched on that earlier, they generally have provisions that say you can only borrow this much because they don't have a debt limit in the Constitution. But GO, general obligations, you're really limited by the Constitution.
So this is a pre-refunded bond that you're talking about?
Well, this would be called an advance refunding. And once you did the advance refunding, those bonds would become pre-refunded. That's the term.
Okay.
So the 15B and the 14C, if you did an advance refunding, those bonds would be pre-refunded at that point.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
You bet.
Can you take us through real quick, sir, about how legally that impacts our debt load?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So all of these are good questions. So when you do an advance refunding and you set that escrow up, those old bonds go off your book. They are pre-refunded. So that's what you were getting at. They're pre-refunded, so they don't even show up on your audit anymore. They're what we call legally defeased. And they're gone. Now, they're still in the marketplace. Somebody still is owning them and collecting the interest payments until that call date, but they're no longer a debt of the city. They don't have any recourse to the city of Irondale anymore. The holders of those bonds can't come back to you and demand taxes or things like that. They're no longer a debt because they've got an escrow account, and it's U.S. Treasuries that are in it, and that is what we call legal defeasance. So you're replacing new bonds. These bonds go away, and now you're going to replace them with new bonds at lower interest rate. So,
In the numbers that you were showing, the 332 versus the 246, the 332 would be taking a lump sum, and the 246 would be just a cost savings on a semi-annual basis.
no, so the 332 that's adding up that whole column that says savings. Okay, so that's the annual payment reduction you get each year. When you add it up over the life of the deal, it comes to 332. That's what we call the gross savings. That's the actual dollars you'd be saving. If you take a present value of that in today's market, it's about 246. So if you were going to say we want the money up front, you'd get what's in the green box.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Everything that you presented is in this presentation?
Yes, ma'am. It is.
Great, thank you.
And my name's on the front. If you've got any other questions or you think of something that's not in there you'd like to see, I'd be happy to get that for you.
You answer my question?
John? Councilman Lynn?
Good. Thanks, sir.
Yep, good to see you again, Mr. Councilman.
Fair enough. Mayor Stewart, is there anything you want to comment on, or?
You might be asleep. This is all Pat for you.
I want to thank Reed for coming and giving the presentation and just be able to give us some education about how it is dealing with municipal bonds, because dealing with municipal finances is a little bit different than dealing with your regular finances, and you can do some stuff here that you you can't do like, you probably never heard the term slugs. But you can use those when you're getting ready to defease a bond, because you still can't pay that bond off before the call date, so you have to put those funds in escrow, and you have to determine what the interest rate is going to be able to make up the difference for the escrow. Usually you will find several companies that would actually put a bid together for the escrow account, and it's usually your larger banks that bid on these type of deals here to be able to hold those securities until it's time to be able to defease the bonds. So my comment to the council is, there were several things that we were requested to do the last time we went to the market. They wanted to make sure that we did multi-year budgeting. They wanted to make sure that we had a capital plan that was in effect for, I want to say, over a 5-year period. And they also wanted us to strengthen our financial policies as well as our debt policies. I believe now is an excellent time to be able to do all of those things. And we're also working towards getting our 2020 audit done as well, because you usually have to have your audit ready as well. And we're working on getting started on that probably next month, and it usually takes 30 to 60 days, or really 60 to 90 days to be able to get that done. So I think what we can do is to go ahead and prepare ourselves, and whenever the interest rate is right or the savings is in a place where it will be larger than what it is today, then we will be prepared to be able to go into the market if you need to be able to do it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with getting prepared. We just need to wait to the right time and to see exactly how things are going in the market. But if we're prepared and have our official statement and all the other documents together, audits, then it's easier for the underwriter to go ahead and pull the trigger. So that's my recommendation, that we go ahead and get prepared. As if we're going to do it, doesn't mean that we're going to do it, but at least we are prepared to do it. And when the opportunity presents itself, then we are prepared to jump into the market to be able to take advantage of the savings.
Mayor Stewart, I had one question for you. When I was reviewing the 2019 minutes, I noticed that on July the 16th, there was a resolution, 2019 R34, that authorized Raymond Jones to underwrite the refunding of general obligation warrants 2010 and 2011A. Do you remember how much that was for?
I want to say those are the refundings that netted $1.3 million to the city.
Okay.
There you go. It's the see that column that says 2019? That's the bond issue that I think I know that's the one you're referring to. It refunded the 2010s, the 2011As, and $2 million. Yeah, there you are, $2 million new money. So.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there's no further questions, thank you very much, sir.
I hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving.
You as well.
Have a good time with your families, I hope, and thank you for allowing us to be here.
Use your contact information on this?
Yes, sir. It's on the very front cover.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank y'all.
Is this yours, Reed?
You know, I think they'd like it if I took my laptop back with me. Yeah. That would have been a disaster. You just saved
I figured you don't have to drive back from Montgomery overnight.
No, I do not. Thank you.
Absolutely. There you go. Thank you, sir. Councilman London, did you want to come on up? Yes, I have. Let's get settled here. All right, Ms. Puckett, you have the floor.
All right, great. Good evening, I'm Lindsay Puckett, Principal Planner with the Regional Planning Commission in Greater Birmingham, so I know that David, Bobby, Joe, John, and the Mayor know who I am, but Cindy and Robert, nice to meet you. So we're really excited to hear about James becoming mayor, and he reached out to me shortly after the election and said, hey, I'd be interested in us updating the last Irondale comp plan, which my team developed. I'll say that we worked with Jill Washington at the time, and Jill and I were just talking about the three of us who all started on the same day, but three amigos, as Jill called us, were still around, and so you would probably be the exact same project team who was familiar with the process in the city from 2016. So you all adopted, your planning commission, I would say, adopted planning conference plan in April of 2016. So next April will be 5 years, and that is kind of the rule of thumb where you should be updating a comp plan, because people's priorities and the city, priorities change over time. So what I want to do tonight is just kind of walk you through our thoughts for why you might need an updated comprehensive plan. We've taken a good look at it. I'm going to call it an update, but for the most part, it'll probably be a new document of sorts that we're going to use. We'll reuse it like a lot of the existing conditions document, but the public involvement would be brand new. So we've looked, we've examined what we could still keep to build upon and what we need to do over. So I'm hoping my fonts are going to work on this. It's looking a little bit different, but let's see. Let's get started here. And in your packet, you do have a copy of the presentation slides. Yeah. Is this the can you open the PDF, not the PowerPoint? I think that's the PowerPoint. It's what PDF. Also in your packet, you have a copy of our proposed scope of work. But again, I'm going to go through the elements of that scope of work. And you've got my contact. Either one of those PDFs would work fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we turn one of the TVs for us to see? Is that a possibility?
Oh, you got that? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Did you want to take a look at
Yeah.
these? Your
Thank
hardware.
you.
I can try.
Okay.
It's just my thumb drive. Yeah, just the PDF.
I mean,
So you're saying that only the this will actually go? Okay, let's get started here. So why do you need an updated comprehensive plan? Well, we think there's a number of reasons why. Next. You're gonna have to go fast, but well, first of all, to ensure that the priorities of the new administration can be documented. within the comprehensive plan. And as the mayor said, this is actually, comprehensive plans are your roadmaps, your blueprints for the future. When we give you a list of goals and actions, you'll be able to track progress of implementing those actions. So this is the cover of the old comprehensive plan if you aren't familiar with it, but we will be creating new goals and recommended actions based on the needs of the city today. And that is going to be based on your public input. So we tell people everybody's input matters, but not every idea might get into the plan. But use the comprehensive plan is the citizens' roadmap for the future because it's based upon their input. Next. So we know that you want to capitalize on the growth and development that you're having. Residential development is a lot of commercial development. We've been tracking that. Next. You want to be able to direct that growth and development, and this is the future land use map from 2016, which we would be looking at to update as needed and working with your planning commission on that. Planning commission uses the future land use map to make their rezoning decisions, so having an up-to-date future land use map that's in line with the vision for the city is very important. Next. And then we talked about maybe having, going into 3 different focus areas, the station at Grants Mill, here in downtown Irondale, and then the I-459 at Grants Mill interchange, to really kind of dive deeper into recommendations in those areas. It might be land use recommendations, redevelopment recommendations. So that would be a really robust appendix that we would do, and we would determine the study areas and those limits for those different areas. Next. We also, a new comprehensive plan or updated would help guide your public investments in a way that acknowledges your opportunities as well as challenges that you're facing today. We would be including your pavement management plan priorities, as well as your ADA transition plan. So, current and previous plans you've had in the last 5 years, we would be coming through those to extract things out to include in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan will also inform modifications you need to your city zoning ordinance, and I think that your zoning ordinance, to my knowledge, hasn't had a big overhaul since 1990s maybe, and so sometimes we'll do an audit of that to understand, just make a list of recommendations that your planning commission or you as a city should consider adding or modifying. Other reasons we think that you need an updated comprehensive plan. So you've experienced tremendous growth in the last 5 years since the last plan was adopted. Next, you've really become, a luxury automotive mecca, and I know you want to become more so of that, and you anticipate more dealerships maybe located within your city limits. So we need to acknowledge that and the marketing campaign for that. Next, we know that the Zamora Temple has been purchased, and then you've also the Trinity Hospital owns land next to it. So again, those are major land use and redevelopment issues that you need to plan for. And then, this was huge from the input we heard in 2016. People wanted a grocery store within their city limits. And apparently one is headed your way at the corner of Old Leeds Road and Grants Mill, so that's great. So all these things, reasons why your city's changed here in the last 5 years. And then you've got companies like Motion Industries who love staying in the city limits, and they're building more office and warehouse space. So what deliverables can you expect from us this time around? Well, it would be a new comprehensive plan document, because it's really, we thought about it and it would really be too hard to try to go in and rearrange and update the last one. So it would be a new document, but note that all relevant, we'll go through all of the actions, and we'll need to do that line item by line item to know which ones you want to toss out, what's still relevant, what you've already accomplished. Those that are still relevant, we would keep in there, and then of course public input would determine newer actions that we would include. There would be a brand new executive summary. And then next, we would update existing conditions appendix. And that's a snapshot of what's going on today with socio-demographics, your housing trends, the existing land use, your existing zoning analysis, and then an inventory of your community facilities and parks, which hasn't really changed. So again, that's why a lot of that effort we can save a little bit money on because not a whole lot would change in that appendix itself. So then the next appendix would be the public involvement summary, and that would be brand new because we would be redoing or the public involvement part of this. And so normally in that appendix, it's basically our transparency of everything we've heard. It's the results of the survey, the number, and then we have a whole participation table where people can see how many people came to our public open houses, how many people took the survey, how many people were on your steering committee, that kind of thing. So it's a great way to be transparent about the input that we receive through the process. Next. And then, again, speaking to those 3 focus areas, we would probably put all those recommendations in a detailed appendix. And that appendix, for each of those areas, we would probably analyze existing conditions, and then we'll come up with catalytic project ideas, recommendations, and then we would have a lot of graphic illustrations. And to give you an example next of what that could look like, we could consider, we've got great graphic people on our team that could create detailed 3D renderings. Next. And then there's like numbers on that map, and that's where we would correlate them to recommended catalytic project ideas, list of recommendations for those areas. Next. We provide graphics and text to explain the ideas further. And this is a really good selling piece for developers to understand kind of your vision for these areas. Next. And then, as necessary, we might provide case studies where something similar has happened in another city for the concept that we're trying to portray. So, what topics will the comprehensive plan itself address? The first chapter is probably going to be a little bit of the same. It talks about the purpose of the plan, planning authority under the Code of Alabama, the relationship between the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance, and that's important for you all to understand that this comprehensive plan is like a wish list. It's a policy document. Whereas zoning ordinance is regulatory, it's legal, dealing with people's property rights. So the Planning Commission, they adopt the comprehensive plan and you all endorse it. But we always include on the first page, behind the title page, we have a disclaimer that basically says that the contents of this plan is in no way binding upon you all, the city, and basically implementing any of the action. So we understand that not everybody, especially you all as elected officials, would believe in every single action in the plan, and you're not obligated to do it. And that's decisions you all would make later on in the process if you're allocating funds for it. But again, it's a wish list, it's a policy document. Future land use chapter we would update. We have dedicated pages for each of the future land use categories. We revisit those goals and actions. Next chapter would be transportation, and in the last plan we had a very robust transportation appendix, and so I wouldn't think a lot of that has changed, but here's where we would include your priorities from your pavement management plan and your ADA transition plan needs. We would really get into a list of multimodal project recommendations and ways to enhance safety and connectivity. You do have a big bicycle community, and a lot of people go through Irondale, you well know, and there's a lot of desires for more bicycle infrastructure and trails, and that's where we would include a lot of that information there. Green Systems chapter, we know you've thought about creating a parks master plan, and we would hope that you would proceed with that. That was actually a recommendation in the last plan. Part of our surveys, we ask specifically about, Pekin Park or in different parks, we ask people what type of improvements they want, so that's gonna be a list of improvements. We'll talk about ways to capitalize on your ecotourism, and then appropriate areas for green infrastructure and best management practices, and being a good neighbor to Copper River. Economic development chapter is where we might get into things such as updating your citywide branding, establishing a facade improvement grant program, maybe updating your city gateways, wayfinding signage, recommending. And last time we had a handful of adaptive free use or catalytic sites we might, and what those sites could be well suited for, and so we might revisit those. And then the last topical chapter would be public services and infrastructure. This is where, after our zoning audit, we would list our recommended zoning ordinance modifications. Here's where we might talk about addressing some neighborhood issues or code enforcement issues that might come up in public involvement, and any recommendations to community facilities. All of this gets tied up in a bow in the last chapter, the implementation chapter, where we have a very detailed implementation matrix. Go to the next page. In that matrix, basically we show the chapter and the goal and the action we relate. We tell you which page number that action is detailed on. And then we give you a potential time frame for implementation. Is it short term, like maybe 0 to 5 years? Is it ongoing, or is there going to be a long term? And then we might list the parties that should be the lead, should take the lead on being responsible for implementing that action. So public involvement, as I said, would be brand new and robust. We had a very robust public involvement last time. We had council district meetings, we had town hall, topical town halls, we had open houses, the visioning survey. So we will come through a lot, but again, we want to make sure that the people who live here now, you might have had people moving in the last 5 years, and we want to get their voice as well. So to talk about kind of our typical input activities, I'll walk you through a few things here. Yeah, next. So we branded the last comprehensive plan as Irondale on the Move, and there is a dedicated website that we created, but then we handed it over to the city, irondaleonthenews.com, where we would place all the project-related documents and the landing page. So we could save a little bit of money on that dedicated website if y'all can be able to transfer that domain project management of the website back to us during the development plan, if you have it. Next. So we already have a big stakeholder list of the people who did participate last time. So we have about 382 existing email addresses, which is also going to be able to start with. And then as people come to public events, we ask them to sign and give their email addresses. That's how you add more people to your list. But we've got something to start with, and we use MailChimp now to e-blast out communications about different events or surveys we're having, reminders or links to documents as we reveal them. Next. We would also look at modifying the last visioning survey and adding new questions. We can see all the answers might have changed or not, or we could come up with brand new questions. Next. We also now have an online mapping tool that we use where people can go in and actually pinpoint ideas, points, so they can draw lines. They might show us like, here's where I want sidewalks, or here's a nasty intersection that we think is unsafe for XYZ reasons. So that's great to be able to, for people to geographically pinpoint ideas and issues on a map. And then now we've been paying some money to do Facebook target ads. Probably, I think it's into Instagram. But we can go in and say, all right, in Irondale for the next 2 weeks, we want to get, people would see the ads, take the survey. So that's helped us get more bang for our buck there and increase participation levels. And then in the scope of work, we talked about 3 different rounds of public meetings. The first one would be the visioning. Really the first third of the comprehensive plan process is the most important, because that's when you're getting all the public input. The middle part is when we go in to start creating drafting the outline and the actions itself, and then we bounce those off of, come back and say, did we get it right? And then if we got it right, then we're going to finalize it and then have public hearings for adoption. We use flyers, QR codes that we can put in coffee shops and at community facilities to direct people to get input as well. And I think this is the last part of it, would be we would want you to still have an advisory committee meeting. I'll say the last time we probably had a group of about 20 people, and it was one of the best groups, the largest groups and most the group that was the most participating, I guess, of a lot of the cities that we've worked in. So that group would probably meet 3 times during the development of the plan. They would be the champions, and they would help us, guide us in direction. Did we get it right? Are we hearing this right? Who else do we need to talk to? That type of thing. So next slide. This is usually how we like to. We want to make sure that the advisory committee or steering committee has a great mix of members. So we would want the mayor, any city staff from various city departments related to the comprehensive plan, at least 1 council member, at least 1 planning commission member, representative from the CDA, representative from the chamber, representatives from faith-based institutions, nonprofits within the city limits, representatives from Ruffner, Green Resource, ecotourism industry, from your development community, business owners, major employers, and any residents, civic activists. We've also scoped out up to 8 focus group meetings or stakeholder group meetings that we could conduct, and sometimes the mayor might ask us to do these with various department heads to understand their needs, or it might be a developer roundtable, or any of your boards and commissions. This is where we can dive in deeper with a certain group. And on average, in the last 5 years of the different cities that we've been working in, and we've been working in, let's see, after we did Alabaster, Irondale, Centerpoint. We've been working in almost all the areas of the city of Birmingham, Pelham, Montevallo, Chelsea. Right now we're working in Clear. We've been going more south in Shelby County, but on average we get about 10% of the city's population participates in some manner of either coming to give their input physically at an open house or a pop-up event or online survey. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. It seems low, but that's actually really good. So what's the process of partnering with us, the RPC? Your mayor knows this, that we have something called the Building Communities Grant Program, where we set aside federal transportation funding, so the project is able to leverage that if you have at least just a transportation component to a land use project. So easily this is an eligible project. So what we're basically is 80-20 money, where you all as a city would just have to put up the 20% local match for the project, and we bring the 80% federal transportation funds to match it. So what we have scoped out here is basically $150,000 project cost, where you all as a municipality would only have to match that with the 20%, which is about $29,995. So the next steps for working with us is that we would agree to the scope of work and fee, and again, the scope of work in detail is in your folder here. Then you as the city council would vote to enter into a resolution agreement with us, and then we would invoice you all for that 20%. And signing the agreement and paying would basically get you all in our future pipeline of work. And with our workload right now, we could probably get started in springtime.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions?
What would be your estimated completion date if you started in springtime?
So generally, it takes about 9 to 12 months to develop a citywide comprehensive plan. But again, because we already have a lot of the mapping, a lot of, analysis done, I think we could probably get it done in about 6 months, 6 to 9 months. 6 months, we would probably have a good end product, and then you gotta go through the adoption schedule, public hearings before both bodies, planning commission and the council. But, given the fact that we've already done a lot of the legwork, it's probably about 6 to 8 months.
Just have one question I was gonna ask. Because of COVID, this pandemic that we're under right now, are you currently working with a municipality on their comprehensive plan?
Absolutely. So when COVID hit, we were working with Montevallo and Chelsea, and we were beginning to draft the plan. And it actually expedited our process because we were at home producing a lot better. And then usually in the summer times, you never get a comprehensive plan adopted because they might not have quorums at these, public hearings, but those people weren't traveling as much. We were able to finish both of those, and we started a clear comprehensive plan faster than anticipated. So I will say in Clara, in August and September, we had 2 open houses, and they were very well attended. I mean, we just enforced the mask. We have hand sanitizer with pens. So again, that's why we also want to offer the online input, but so far it hasn't slowed us down. It's actually made things a little bit faster for us because we can put our heads down a little bit better.
Thank you. Because I did take part in the one that was held back in 2014, 15, and we had the gatherings over at Shades Valley, and so that's why I was asking.
Correct. It's just, each city is a little bit different, so it's just what you all feel comfortable with, how you want to get the input. Sometimes there's just like where we could set it up outside, we could do that, because usually that first public meeting, it's more of an open house where we had different stations. It's not me making a presentation, where that would maybe happen at the very end, where I'm presenting the draft plan. So that first public meeting, we could have it outside as long as we have, easels and tables to put activities on.
Thank you.
Have you conducted some, any Zoom meetings since you've been working with, Cholera?
We,
Those municipalities, and how have they gone?
We've conducted one online Zoom public meeting for the Southern Area Framework Plan in Birmingham. And I think there were about 20 or 25 people that logged on. We did a presentation, and then just had to point people to online, ways to give input. I've heard from planners at other firms where I think somebody working on the Prattville when it first hit. I think he gave a presentation live like this, and they had Zoom, and it was also on Zoom, so he could take people's questions from online. I think that hybrid is a little bit harder, but we do have the Zoom webinar software that we've purchased to have larger crowds be able to participate, or we could do recordings,
Anybody else?
Just one more question. Have there been other municipalities that have had you involved in revising their comprehensive plans since you've done the first one?
Right. So Clara right now, I think their last one was 2008. Center Points we've done, yes. So we do a lot of it. Our Regional Planning Commission in Greater Birmingham has been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, like, a lot of, ever since, since this past election season, we've had even smaller municipalities coming to ask us, like Mulga and Harpersville. Harpersville, like, we have a 2005 master plan, can you help us,
Okay.
So absolutely, but usually there's, a new administration comes in and says, golly, why isn't our comprehensive plan updated? And it might have been sitting there for 15 years. But you also have people sitting right here that were involved in the last plan and they know the importance of it. So.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, you said some were 2005, others 2008. Do we have any that are 5 years that are being revised?
Not to my knowledge, because I started about 6 years ago, so.
Okay.
Councilman Lennon, any questions from your end? Are you good? Councilman Box?
I'm good.
Councilman Wilson?
No, yeah.
And that, Councilman Wilson, your question actually addressed one of my questions, so I'm good as well.
Okay. Great.
Mayor Stewart?
Just wanted to thank Lindsay for coming out and being able to make the presentation. The reason that I asked her to come out, and I know that we probably ain't even, well, I ain't been in office a month yet, but I started talking to her about 2 or 3 months ago, and I learned that there are a lot of other municipalities that want to get comprehensive plans done. So she encouraged me to go ahead and see if we could go ahead, and if we're going to do it, to go ahead and get it in the pipeline so that we'll have a possibility to win the, I guess.
And our workload a lot.
Yes.
We finished up the major two we're working on right now.
Right. So that's why it's, to me, I would say it's a sense of urgency. Because, if you start in April and then it takes 6 to 9 months, it's almost like our first year is gone. And if anybody can think of any other way to be able to create a blueprint or to develop a strategic plan to be able to lead the city forward, I'm more than welcome to be able to listen to them. However, their product is proven. We had an excellent comprehensive plan 5 years, 6 years ago. What she's mentioned is that our environment has changed. So when your environment changes, you get new information, and we have new people that are in the community, and we just want them to be involved in the process. So I would like for the council to consider, I will put this agreement on our next council meeting for December the 2nd. If you all have any additional questions, I would ask you to follow up with Lindsay. If you have any questions that you want to ask me about the plan, feel free to give me a call or stop by and we can cover it as well. But I just want to thank you, Lindsay, for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all for being interested in our services.
Lindsay, I have one other, it's not a question, it's a statement. I know we have some major developments that's going on around the city of Irondale, like we got Amazon, we got $11 million expansion, which is in Irondale, but then we have the VA center that's moving on the corner over in Crestwood Boulevard. So what I assume is that will play a part in this planning as well, because
Right.
even though it's not happening in the city of Irondale, it may, change some things as far as our zoning and things like that. Well, as far as preference or whatever the case may be, will that play a role in this comprehensive planning?
Absolutely, and I gotta say we got a leg up on that because that's.
Because that's gonna change a lot.
That area is what, let me back up. So we've been working with the city of Birmingham planning staff the last 7 years. City of Birmingham adopted their comprehensive plan, and one of the recommended actions said, okay, dive deeper, basically divide the city into 9 different sub-areas, and they call it framework plans. And so we've been, we're now on the 9th, and it's what's called the southern area, and it includes Crestwood, Crestline, neighborhoods, Redmont, Forest Park. So we're about a third of the way through that process. We just kind of finished the kickoff phase, but that area we're already studying right now what's going on, and so we'd be able to make sure that the recommendations line up, and so we'd be looking at city of Birmingham zoning and where it abuts you all, that type of stuff. So absolutely.
Any further questions? Mayor Stewart, is there anything else you want to cover tonight before we dismiss?
No, unless someone has questions that you want to ask.
Any questions for the mayor? Fair enough. I'll make a motion we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. It's good to see you
Good to
again.
see you again, David.
Good job.